Whether the dreams brought on the fever, or the fever brought on the dreams, Walter Gilman did not know. Behind everything crouched the brooding, festering horror of the ancient town, and of the mouldy, unhallowed garret gable where he wrote, and studied and wrestled with figures and formulae when he was not tossing on the meager iron bed. His ears were growing sensitive to a preternatural and intolerable degree, and he had long ago stopped the cheap mantel clock whose ticking had come to seem like a thunder of artillery. At night the subtle stirring of the black city outside, the sinister scurrying of rats in the wormy partitions, and the creaking of hidden timbers in the sentried house were enough to give him a sense of strident pandemonium. The darkness always teemed with unexplained sound, and yet he sometimes shook with fear lest the noises he heard should subside, and allow him to hear certain other fainter noises which he suspected were lurking behind them. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Carr-Quest of H.P. Lovecraft. Today, we will be covering the dreams in the witch house. So, the dreams in the witch house. Fun fact about the story. Whenever I mentioned that I was going to be reviewing this story for the series, my dad often said that this is one of his absolute favorite Lovecraft stories. Yeah, I can definitely see why. And I also know why he would say this is his favorite, because it's now also, upon some consideration, one of my favorites as well. I really like this story. While reading it, I did kind of go in and out, but actually, it's funny because this is actually one of the stories where I did that the least, because, like, the second half of this thing, it's, like, weirdly action-packed for a Lovecraft story. But what's it about? What is this story indeed about? Well, it follows this guy named Walter Gilman. Not related to anything Gilman from Shadow over Innsmouth, although the town of Innsmouth is named in this story. Nothing else is done with it, it's just kind of mentioned that, oh, Innsmouth exists. It's mostly in Arkham, Miskatonic University. And Walter Gilman is kind of a sort of a folklore mathematician. I think he's like a mathematician who's fascinated by folklore and other dimensions and outside time and space kind of deals. And the more he looks into it, because he also sort of lives in this, well, the witch house. And the witch house is said to have once been, from what I understand of the story anyway, it was once inhabited by a witch named, I think it was Keziah? Was it Keziah? Hold on, let me check. It was, yes, it was, Keziah Mason. And there's also, like, this familiar she has. It's like this weird rat thing named Brown Jenkin. And there's mysterious other things going on, and the more he finds out about Keziah Mason and going outside of time and space and everything, and also involves the room he's in, the more things begin to sort of close in on him. So yeah, that's all what happens in the story. It's actually quite well paced, which is definitely different from Shadow over Innsmouth, which was front-loaded and back-loaded with exposition like you wouldn't believe. I think that's one of the main reasons why it was so hard for me to read Shadow over Innsmouth. I like Shadow over Innsmouth, but the exposition dumps were just, like, it was almost intolerable. It would go on for just pages and pages and pages. And again, it's not bad, it's just... Anyway, we're not talking about Shadow over Innsmouth, we're talking about this. And I really like this. This is very well paced. It starts off slow, but it slowly builds and builds and builds until actually probably one of Lovecraft's greatest climaxes in terms of his stories. Yeah, I just really like this story, just a whole lot. the more I'm really thinking about it as I'm talking about it, and the more I'm sort of thinking about, Walter Gilman and his sort of descent into finding out about Keziah Mason and sort of literally approaching the barriers of space-time, it's kind of cool. Like, it's a cool concept, and it's an ultimately cool story. Now, I will admit, towards the end, there's not so great uh, uh, epithets used to describe certain things. But like that's still bad. But like, as I've done with other Lovecraft stories, I acknowledge that they're there, that they're unavoidable, but ultimately to let the rest of the story sort of set in, but still not forget the things that are definitely there, and they are there. Don't get me wrong, they are there, but ultimately I think it's just the idea, and if that does turn you off, that is 100% legitimate. It kind of made me go, for God's sake, Howard, for God's sake. But yeah, other than that sort of roadblock, I really like this story, and I actually do recommend it. Is it? I think I would probably give this a high A, maybe even an S rank, up there with like Eric Zahn and Statement of Randolph Carter and Dunwich Horror and a couple other stories. So yeah, I really like this story. So we finally made it, folks. The last story of our collection. The last story in this book is coming. And it is the novella, The Shadow Out of Time. But then after that, there's actually going to be another episode where I discuss the stories more in full. But, yes, next episode, we will have completed the first book of our quest, of our Carr-Quest, if you will. So if you'll join me for the last story in our collection, The Shadow Out of Time, that happens next week, hopefully. But until then, I have been your host, Andrew Carr. This has been the Carr-Quest of H.P. Lovecraft, and I will see y'all next time. See ya.